There is a moment in every great institution's history when the people it was built to serve finally say, enough. Not quietly, not politely, not in a letter that gets filed away and forgotten, but loudly, formally, and with the full weight of the law behind them. That moment arrived for FIFA this year, and it came from the continent that has given the world more footballers, more fans, more passion, and more of the cultural fabric of this game than anywhere else on Earth. Europe had reached its limit. And what happened next, the formal complaints, the legal filings, the investigations, the water bottle that became a symbol of everything wrong, revealed a crisis at the very heart of the 2026 World Cup that FIFA simply could not spin its way out of. Stay with us, because this story builds in ways you will not expect, and by the end of this video, you will understand why football fans across an entire continent looked at this tournament and decided they had no choice but to fight back. Let us begin with a number that tells the whole story: 7 times. That is how much more expensive the cheapest available ticket to the 2026 World Cup final was compared to the equivalent seat at the previous World Cup in Qatar. Not double, not triple, 7 times the price. A ticket that cost just over $500 in Doha now started at more than $4,000 in New Jersey. And that was not the ceiling, that was the floor. Football Supporters Europe, the organization that represents tens of millions of supporters across the continent, looked at those numbers and felt something shift. Their executive director, Ronan Even, had spent years navigating the delicate relationship between fan groups and football's governing bodies. He was not a man given to dramatic language, and yet when he described what FIFA had done with ticket pricing for this tournament, he reached for a phrase that stopped people in their tracks. He called it a monumental betrayal. Not a disappointment, not a mistake, a betrayal. Of the tradition of the World Cup, of the contribution that traveling supporters make to the tournament's soul, of the fundamental promise that the most important football competition on the planet belongs to the people who love the game. He said his organization was stunned by the prices FIFA had set. He said this was a handful of people trying to extract as much money as possible from a tournament that had been built over a century on something entirely different. And he said with quiet fury that the very nature of the competition was now at risk. And then Football Supporters Europe did something that had never happened before in the history of the World Cup. They went to court. On the 24th of March, Football Supporters Europe and the International Consumer Protection Organization, Euroconsumers, filed an 18-page formal complaint with the European Commission in Brussels. Not a petition, not an open letter, a legal complaint against FIFA, accusing football's governing body of abusing its dominant market position to impose excessive prices and unfair conditions on European fans. The complaint was precise, detailed, and devastating. It identified 6 specific abuses: sky-high prices, higher than any previous World Cup; dynamic pricing applied without transparency or justification; seating maps that changed after purchase, leaving fans with seats they had never agreed to buy; a ticket resale platform operated by FIFA itself, on which the organization collected a 15% commission from both buyer and seller simultaneously; a deliberate discouragement of established resale platforms that might have offered fans fairer prices; and a system so opaque that no fan could know before committing their money how many tickets remained or where those seats actually were in the stadium.
They called on the European Commission to intervene immediately, to freeze prices, to restore transparency, to protect European consumers from an organization that, in their words, had used its monopoly power to impose conditions that would never be acceptable in any competitive market. For people who love football, who have attended World Cups, who have followed their teams across continents, the language of that complaint carried a weight beyond the legal technicalities, because what FSE and Euro consumers were really saying was this: FIFA had forgotten who the game belongs to. A supporter following their national team through the entire 2026 tournament, from the first group stage match all the way to the final through the official supporters club allocation system, would face a bill of at least $6,900 in tickets alone. That figure was nearly 5 times the equivalent cost at the Qatar World Cup just 4 years earlier, and it did not include flights. It did not include hotels. It did not include food or transport or any of the other expenses that a traveling football fan carries through 3 weeks in a foreign country. The loyal supporter, the person who had attended every qualifying match, who had bought their tickets early through their national association, who had done everything right, was being asked to pay 5 times more than they had 4 years ago for the same experience, following the same team, to the same dream. And the category of ticket reserved exclusively for the most dedicated supporters, the cheapest seats, Category 4, FIFA had decided would not even be available through official supporter allocations. Those tickets, FIFA determined, would go instead to general public sales and dynamic pricing. The people most committed to the game, the people who had built the atmosphere that made the World Cup what it is, were directed toward the most expensive options available. Ronan Avon said it plainly: the fan who could not afford it was not being offered an alternative. They were simply being shut out. But here is where the story takes a turn that even the most cynical football observer did not see coming. Because while the European Commission complaint was working its way through the formal legal machinery, while the lawyers were reading documents and the commissioners were being briefed, FIFA made a decision so baffling, so poorly timed, so completely tone-deaf to the fury already surrounding the tournament, that it became an instant symbol of everything fans were fighting against. They banned water bottles. Not dangerous items, not glass, not weapons. Water bottles. Reusable water bottles, the kind that millions of people carry everywhere, that parents fill for children on hot days, that fans had been told, explicitly told, in writing, in official communications, would be permitted inside the stadiums. A graphic had been circulated to ticket holders showing exactly what was allowed: a transparent, plastic reusable bottle up to 1 liter filled inside the stadium. Fans had read it, accepted it, and planned accordingly. For a tournament where scientists had warned that up to a quarter of all matches would be played in temperatures exceeding 26 degrees, where several stadiums were open air, where the summer heat of the American South and West was a genuine welfare concern, fans had at least taken comfort in knowing they could manage their own hydration. And then, 5 days before the tournament began, FIFA quietly updated its stadium code of conduct. Reusable water bottles were no longer permitted. The decision had been reversed. No explanation, no apology for the confusion, just a 35-page document updated without announcement, and a new reality for fans preparing to attend matches in 90-degree heat. The reaction from fan groups was instantaneous and fierce. The Free Lions, an England supporters group affiliated with Football Supporters Europe, issued a statement that captured exactly what millions of people were feeling. They asked what would come next. Sun cream banned, they said, forcing fans to buy it inside the stadium. They called it a strange and late change, and then they used 3 words that cut straight to the heart of it: the latest money grab.
Because that is what it looked like. FIFA had a sponsorship deal with a major beverage company. Water bottles inside stadiums were available for between $4 and $6 each. Fans who had been told they could bring their own had made their plans based on that information. And 5 days before the first match, that promise was taken away. The Football Supporters Association, which represents fans across Britain, confirmed it had received specific assurances from FIFA that free water would be available and that fans could bring their own bottles. Now those assurances had been withdrawn.
One spokesperson said, with a restraint that barely contained the anger behind it, that fan welfare should be FIFA's priority, not the ability to sell more bottled water at inflated prices. FIFA, facing a wall of outrage, reversed course within 48 hours. A new announcement appeared on social media. One sealed disposable bottle, 20 ounces, would be permitted per fan per match. Reusable hard-sided bottles remained banned for safety reasons. The crisis was technically resolved, but the damage it inflicted on FIFA's credibility went far beyond the water bottle itself. Because the episode was not really about hydration, it was about trust. And trust, once spent, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. Here is the question that European fan groups were now asking out loud. If FIFA was willing to change a basic welfare policy without warning, days before the tournament began, simply to sell more drinks, what else had been done in the same spirit? What other decisions had been made quietly and without consultation at the expense of the people sitting in those seats? The German Football Federation had already been forced to hold an emergency meeting to discuss something that would have been unthinkable just years earlier: a full boycott of the 2026 World Cup. German football, the country that had won the tournament 4 times, that had been a pillar of European footballing culture for generations, sat around a table and seriously considered whether to withdraw entirely. They ultimately decided against it. Their statement was measured and dignified. They spoke of believing in the unifying power of sport. They spoke of their goal being to strengthen football's positive force, not to prevent it. Germany's team would be at the World Cup. But the fact that the conversation happened at all, that a football federation of Germany's stature sat in a room and asked whether this tournament was still worth being part of, says everything about how far confidence in FIFA had fallen. Even the former FIFA president, Sepp Blatter, a man whose own complicated history with the organization was well known, publicly told fans to stay away from the tournament. The man who had once run world football, advising the world not to attend. And Amnesty International, monitoring the situation from outside the sport, issued a formal warning. Without urgent safeguards, they said, the 2026 World Cup risked becoming a threat to the very fans it was supposed to celebrate. The organization that monitors human rights worldwide was watching a football tournament as though it were a humanitarian concern. Through all of this, the legal complaints, the water bottle crisis, the boycott discussions, the formal investigations by American attorneys general, FIFA's public position remained largely unchanged. The tournament was sold out. Demand was unprecedented. The World Cup would be the greatest in history. But the distance between those statements and the reality on the ground had grown so wide that fans across Europe had stopped listening. They had seen the prices. They had read the changed seating maps. They had watched their water bottles disappear from the permitted items list 5 days before they were due to travel. They had attended meetings of their supporter groups and heard the same stories from Brussels and Berlin and London and Madrid. And they had decided that the response could not be another open letter, another petition, another politely worded request for FIFA to reconsider. This time, it needed to be the European Commission. It needed to be lawyers. It needed to be formal, legal, documented, and impossible to ignore.